Welcome. So I'm going to start very quickly on my layout of supplies. Everybody will have seen the supply list, which includes brushes, pencils, and a series of colors. My advice for most people, if they're just starting out and don't want to spend a ton of money at first, the best advice I could say is spend your money on paper. Okay, it's your most valuable resource. Your work sits on that. It's okay if you're practicing brush strokes or not doing anything of significance, but for the color theory and learning how colors sit on the paper, the better quality paper is made from cotton paper. Watercolor paper has a sizing in it. In other words, a glue usually made into the paper, but on cheaper brands, sometimes brush on. We call this sizing, okay? Typically, it's made, the better quality papers, right into the paper, into handmade cotton paper, okay? Papers like Arches, Fabriano, Saunders, a plethora of other handmade papers are the best quality. You don't necessarily have to have the best quality, but you do want a good quality watercolor paper, 140 pounds minimum, not 90 pounds. And you want to make sure that the color sits on top of the paper, not getting absorbed in. If your colors look flat, you know, like kind of like if you want to experiment, get some newsprint or cheap paper or drawing paper and put a stroke on the drawing paper and then try it on the watercolor paper and see the difference. Okay, some papers put a lot of sizing and all the color sits on top, which can be also bad because the color doesn't absorb into the paper to be able to build rich darks. It's quite a trick. I won't want to spend more time on the paper. We will touch on it. And if you have questions, please ask me. Most of the papers that we carry in the store are good quality. There's a couple that are, fairly inexpensive. You like everything, you get what you pay for, right? But if you're not happy, that's where I would start your investment in watercolor. All right, so I like a big palette with a big well. Okay, a big mixing area. Okay, if you got a tiny little ones, the ones you guys have in here are perfect. They're great. I like going to these bigger wells because I just leave my paint in there. Before I start, I just use this little mister. This guy fell out. I haven't used this palette since November and I haven't cleaned it. I don't clean it after I clean it before. For two reasons. One is I like to use all this stuff in the middle as a nice neutral gray to do either thumbnails or just to get myself mentally prepared. It's like kind of a process. For me though, it's like I like cleaning all this stuff up like this. It usually makes a muddy color. I can add a little bit of other color to it to make it more neutral. And for doing little what we call value studies, and I will touch on that later in the class so you'll know what that means, then presto, I've got some warm-up material, no paint wasted. And when I'm ready to paint, just take a little bit of a paper towel, Kleenex, toilet paper, and then we're back to clean. Some people, some fastidious anal artist type, and not a judgment, just saying, they meticulous about cleaning the palettes, right? But if you don't know your color theory, that's not going to help. Better to be messy like me and have good color theory. Okay, I know some artists that they don't know, like some of the best artists that I know, like they don't clean their palette very often as well. And I remember when I was younger, I was like, wow, how do they get such fresh, clean color? It was always a puzzle to me. It's because it's the colors that you choose. I use these spray bottles. I use a really dense sponge, often just to dip my brush and control the amount of water on my brush that you'll see. But you could use a roll of paper towel just as easily, okay? I use mechanical pencils, 2B, to draw because I do not like sharpening my pencils. And this is much easier. And it keeps a nice clean line, okay? So for me, mechanical pencils, and I use a 9mm. It's the 0.9 millimeters, so it's a bit bigger. And then finally, onto brushes, I use a combination of sable, squirrel, and synthetic. I will talk more about brushes. I don't want to take up so much to deal with. It doesn't really matter. The important thing, like I say, are the colors that you choose in your palette and your paper. Brushes, so long as they can hold water, are fine. So I'll talk about like what most people have, and I've been recommending, are Nimbus watercolor brushes. These are probably about 15 or 16 years old since we first had them made. They're manufactured, they're out of synthetic, so plastic filaments. The difference is, like my old fingers, they have been serrated, okay? Each filament has been a spiral around it. Also, the difference is that the filaments are different thicknesses, like my fingers. This does two things. One, the water can grip onto the ridge of the filament, so it doesn't just roll off like a tube of plastic, right? So imagine a piece of water rolling off a single tube of plastic. It's just going to run right down. If it has ridges, it's going to go slower, right? The filaments are different thicknesses, so the gap between the filaments is different. This gives the brush water area. This gives the water some area to pool, and what we call belly. So this is a sable brush, and I use sable and I use squirrel. Sable has more, well, let's go back. I'm sorry. Let's go to the synthetic brush. Because they're plastic, they usually have more spring. You see my brush popping up and down? So they have a pushback. We call that a spring to the hair, which is really good for beginners because you can come up and down and get a nice point easily as a beginner. Okay, really great. The reason we design these brushes is because, 20 years ago when I first started doing this, people would show up to class with dollar store brushes that were made of synthetic, and they couldn't hold water. Because they can't hold water, it means that you can't make big pools of paint because you can't collect the paint, right? Make sense? Mm-hmm. So you need a brush that holds water. Also, you need to be able to release the water of the pigment. Okay, so I like a brush that has some ability to hold water. Okay, you'll get to feel the difference in your brush before you've wet it, or when it's dry, and when it's wet. This is really important in terms of brush control, in particular for watercolors. This is one of the best brushes that money can buy. It's a Kolinsky sable made from a sable, kind of like a badger, from one area of Russia, only from the male center of the tail. The hairs are selected, and they're selected in a certain length and graded, so that the longer hairs are on the outside and the shorter hairs are on the inside. And under what we call the ferrule, it's coned. Okay, and this gives the best point in your brush. My Nimbus brushes are all the same size, and they're just cut afterwards. It's a money-saving thing. Obviously, these are hand done, much more expensive. $12, $190, $200, right? Like really not inexpensive. But if it's your life, it's your life. Also, what the Nimbus brushes is good, and so are these, is what we call the balance of a brush. So a good quality brush would balance, and I don't know if you can see it. I can hold this brush just on my finger. It's just balanced there. It's dry. Nothing's touching there. You can see it coming off. That's a perfectly balanced brush. I can feel the weight of the tip. Then I dip it in the water, and I literally know how much water is in my brush by the weight of the tip. And when I release the water like that, the brush comes back to a point. That's money well spent, right? I also use these a lot more squirrel brushes. Squirrel's a little bit less expensive. These ones aren't. They're European blue squirrel and a Castan squirrel, different types of squirrel, also from Europe. And they're much softer. So they don't hold their shape. They're floppy. I'll show you in later classes why I like that. For today, it's a bit much, but they have very little spring. You see how it keeps its shape? So I can use it for a variety of different brush strokes. When I first started using these brushes, like a couple of artists that I really appreciated their painting style, and you're like, wow, how do they use that brush? And as it turns out, they're not easy until you get the hang of it, until you realize that it's not one of these brushes. These brushes are just have a little bit more spring than this squirrel, but much less spring than the synthetic. Okay, you'll get to feel for that for your brush. You want to play around with it. Now that I've said it, you're going to be a little bit more sensitive to what the tip does. That feel of the brush is so important. Let's get on to that color. So I want you to bring your colors out, if you can, your paints. I don't have my tubes with me right now, but in the first row, we have alizarin crimson, rose madder, and permanent rose. Okay. It doesn't matter which colors you have in that list. I use alizarin crimson a lot. It tends to be a red that leans towards the blue side of the color spectrum. It looks more purple than this red or this red that looks more orange, correct? This red contains blue. This red contains yellow, leans towards the orange side. Can you see that? And the next category, we have cadmium red, vermilion, or permanent rose. So those are colors leading towards the yellow side of the color spectrum. Okay. On the next group, 3 and 4, are the blues. French ultramarine, and I've underlined that because that's more or less what I'm going to use in the class for a blue that leans towards the red side of the spectrum. Okay, Prussian blue, phthalo blue, or cerulean blue lean towards the yellow side of the color spectrum. Okay, as a matter of fact, you know what I am going to do is I'm going to switch cameras because my iPhone has a way better lens. You can see the color better, right? Yeah, better?
Yeah.
Okay, so cerulean blue, Windsor blue, what other colors would be there? Phthalo. You may have colors that are not on the list that fit in that category. Before you use them, you have to find out where they fit in our color wheel, or what I like to call a color compass. Call it a compass rather than a color wheel because it's going to guide you through the forest of watercolor, the darkness of watercolor. And the last categories are the yellows. So group 5 are these lemon citrusy yellows. Do you see them? They're the most transparent typically, vibrant. They lean towards the green. The other yellows that we have on the list, cadmium yellow pale, cadmium yellow medium, new gamboge, Naples, a plethora of others, they lean on the red side of the color spectrum. And I'll switch back and forth so you can see the colors. So here we have the 3 primary colors of what we call subtractive color theory. Okay, this is the golden nugget. All right, so yellow, process yellow, cyan and magenta. First thing you'll want to do is just look at it in your palette and decide, does that look like it's warm or does it look like it's a cool yellow? This is Aurelian yellow, and I know that it is much cooler than I'm going to use transparent yellow oxide. You see in my palette, one looks quite warm, almost orange, and the other, but you could use cadmium yellow. You could use any of the yellows from that list, plus a plethora of other colors. You just need to know where it fits in your color wheel, color compass. So with a clean brush, and it's somewhat important to use a clean brush, I'm going to put a drop, fairly concentrated, on my paper, on the blue side of the Y. Okay? Yeah, you can go. I'm going to continue on and we'll have time to catch up. The next thing that I'm going to do then is do the other. I'm using transparent yellow oxide, but you guys can use any color from that category. What is it? 6 now. I don't know why I didn't start with 1, but you'll see it when I put it down on my paper, the difference in the two colors. And I picked something that are two quite extremes for demonstration purposes. The other thing that you're going to do is once you put that blob down, you're going to add a tiny bit of water to your brush, and you're going to make a little tadpole tail and bring it out of the circle. And you're just going to let that water, well, whereas mine, you're going to let that water pull the color out as far as you can. So can you see it's pretty obvious in this one how the color dissipates? I'm going to do the same thing now with my reds. I'm going to choose the first red I'm going to choose is just like a pad red, pad scarlet, Windsor red. There's so many colors that fit into this category. Mayan red, I think that's what this is. And I'm going to put the Mayan red because I already know that it fits on this side of the color wheel. Wash my brush clean, and I add a little bit of water and pull that color out like a little tadpole. Okay. Now look at that compared to the alizarin crimson. I couldn't live without alizarin crimson. You rose madder, you can use other colors as well, but for me, alizarin crimson is a go-to because of it makes such beautiful darks. So same thing, I'm going to put a drop of alizarin crimson, a dab, and then I'm going to make the tadpole. Oops. There we go. Magenta. Magenta is closer to the alizarin crimson than it is fire engine red. And of course, when we're in school, what are we taught? Red, yellow, blue are the primary colors, right? Wrong. You'll see in a moment why, okay? And cyan, magenta, and processed yellow are the perfect primaries. But unfortunately, our idea of red becomes fire engine red, or blue becomes sky blue. I'm going to do the same with blue. I'm going to use that French ultramarine. Ultramarine you can use as well. French ultramarine is what's in my palette, so I'm going to use that. I'm not just dabbing at the color, I'm making a pool of the color, and I'm getting my brush saturated with that color, and then I pick it up in a pool. While you want a brush that holds water and not a brush that doesn't, so that you can put a proper dollop of color on your color compass. And then the same, I'm gonna do my tadpole. And then the last color that I'm going to use in my color wheel today is cerulean blue, which of course I do not have in this one. So we'll go to swatch. Wash that out, and then another tadpole. Okay, is everybody with me? At home, give me the thumbs up if you're good. Okay, so we've done our 6 colors. Right now, that's all you need. It's helpful if you don't have it for this class, for future classes, maybe next week, is to get like Payne's gray or some neutral. I use neutral tint or Payne's gray, or sometimes I've been really using lunar black, which I will talk about in a little bit, but don't be overwhelmed. With these colors that I put out on my color palette, and with colors that you've put on your color palette, even if the names don't match, you are going to be able to make every color that if I put a piece of paper, you'll be able to match it. Okay, if you had white and a little black, because sometimes the color paper has added stuff. But for the most part, any watercolor color you can mix by the proportions of these 6 colors. Okay? Are we ready to continue? Okay. These colors we call primaries. Primary colors cannot be mixed. Okay? Secondary colors can be mixed. Can anybody tell me what the secondary colors are? I'll give you a hint. They fall between these. Orange, yeah, good. Green, yeah, or violet. I'll put a V for violet, just out of habit. I don't know, the purple is completely right. Okay. So everybody's with me on that? Incidentally, don't type me any messages because I won't see them if you're at home. You just have to unmute yourself and shout out, okay? Because I have so many things going on that I can't pay attention to the chat as well. But here's what we're going to do. Primary colors cannot be mixed. Secondary colors, I'll give you a hint. How many a hint you hear? How many colors do you need to make a secondary color? Hinting. 2. What happens if you mix 3 colors together? Tertiary, yeah. So primary colors are 1 color. Secondary colors are any 2 primary colors mixed together. And tertiary colors, we can also call neutrals, grays, and if incorrectly mixed, mud. Okay, the artist's, what do you call it? What's a nemesis? Yes, thank you. The artist's nemesis, mud. Sometimes mud can be used, neutrals can be used very effectively. They're so important, but mud we'll try and avoid. If we want to create what we call a vibrant green, guess which 2 colors we're going to mix together in the color wheel? And I'm giving you a hint. The colors that are close together in the color wheel, because this yellow does not contain red and this color does not contain red. This color leans towards the purple, so we know it contains red, and this leans towards the orange, so it must contain red. So if we want a vibrant or green, we have to select the colors that are close together in the color wheel. In this case, I don't know what I'm mixing here right now. This lemon yellow, my palette got really mixed up. So, but it's still a citrusy yellow. And I'm going to put a swatch of that down, same way, more concentrated. And then I'm going to go for my cerulean blue, this color. And I can just put that right inside. I can mix it here as well. Look at the wetness of this. Look at the edges, how much more interesting they are, yellow with the blue floating inside, making this green. Look at the variation of color here compared to the flatness of there. We'll let it dry and we'll see. They're really a great watercolor hack, right? Let the water do the work, okay? It's okay. It's not a mistake. I don't want to give you the impression that it's a mistake to mix your colors in the palette. I do it all the time. But I also want you to practice letting colors, when you're confident of the colors, let them float. Okay, so now I'm going to take that transparent quinacridone yellow, or yellow oxide, it's called, lots of different things, but you can choose anything of your warm yellows. And I'm going to put that down a little less concentrated than this. And then, oh, I'm sorry. Oh, I've done it wrong. I'll leave that. Sorry, I got distracted. We're doing this here. Put this here. And then instead of the cerulean blue, I'm going to put the French ultramarine. And I'll just float that in the same way. Does it make it green? Oh. Does it make it green? But it's what we call a neutral green, more muted, less vibrant. Both are good, both are important. We need neutrals and we need vibrance. Okay, we're going to get to that too, but it's super important. So if we want to make a neutral color, right, then you go far away. Use the two colors that are the furthest away. Why is the more important than where? Why? Because French ultramarine contains some red, and transparent yellow oxide contains red. So we're mixing blue, yellow, and inadvertently, if we're not paying attention, red. And if we mix three primaries together, what do we get? Tertiary. That's how we make neutrals not to be muddy. Here's another way. On the side, I'm going to mix the same swatch of green. Oops, that's not really the same swatch. Hold on. And I mix it with the cerulean blue, and I'm going to get this really vibrant green in my palette. Right? You see that? Nice and vibrant. Okay, just in my palette, I want you to watch, and then I'm going to do it on my paper. I'm going to take the smallest amount of red, and I'm going to mix it in. Everyone should be looking because it'll happen quickly. Do you see the difference? If I want to make any color more neutral or less vibrant, we add the complementary opposite. The color that's opposite in the color wheel is what we call the complementary color. The complement of yellow is violet. The complement of blue or cyan is orange. The complement of magenta or red is green, right? So if we add a little bit of red to that same mixture, look what happened. Let's do it on the paper, and you can see in a different way. So I'll mix my vibrant green. And I'll just put a little swatch in there like that. Oh, switch cameras again. That's really too bright for that camera. But there. And then this time I'm just going to float this in there. Oops, need a little bit more. Okay, you see it going neutral? Just mix it up by itself. The more red I add, the more neutral it will become.
Excuse me? It doesn't
Yeah.
matter if it's a cold red or a warm
No,
red?
it doesn't really matter red. Yeah,
Okay.
it will change. I used alizarin crimson because it's more transparent
Oh, okay.
and it'll be less dominant in a way for the demonstration.
Okay,
But
thank
if you can experiment with both, it'll be different with both. I can show you. Let's just mix that same green. And this time it's an excellent question. Tells me you're paying attention. That's good. I do the same thing here like that. And then I'm going to add like a cad red to it. And the cad red is so dominant, it's going to become more orange. Right?
Yeah.
Also, mostly that was too yellow and not green enough. So let's there. Okay. So that works for all the colors. It's super dramatic if we do it with the violet, alizarin crimson, and French ultramarine. So I'm going to put French ultramarine down here, like so. And then I'm going to add alizarin crimson to it. Wow, look at that purple. I'm going to try the same thing with that cad red and cerulean. What do you think of that? It needs to be a little more blue, I think. Red's a bit dominant. Does it even, it hardly looks purple, does it? It needs a little bit more blue because that cad red is, like I say, it's so opaque. There we go. A little bit more on the purple side. You may not be able to see it on the camera if I tilt the paper just right. You can see it coming out a bit more. Let's add a little bit more blue. That's too much blue now. There. Kind of a slate color almost, right? Okay, so here's something very interesting I want you to pay attention to. You see, I've drawn through, put the swatch over top of the line. You see in this cadmium red how you can barely see the line through? The French ultramarine, you can barely see the line through. And the cerulean blue, barely see the line through. The yellows, you can see the line quite easily. French ultramarine, cerulean blue, I made the swatch a little bit too heavy, but I will adjust it a little. And you can see quite, even though it's a darker color, you can still see the line through. What that tells you is something else that's really important as a watercolorist, and we call it opacity versus transparency. Okay, so the colors that have a lot of light pass through are more transparent. Colors that allow less light to pass through are opaque. It's nice to identify your colors as transparent or opaque. On most of the tubes of paint, like Daniel Smith, Winsor Newton, they have a little circle that looks like this. And if it's open, it's transparent. If it's like this, it means it's semi-transparent. And if it's like this, it means it's opaque. Now it doesn't do it for all the colors. Sometimes they actually write it right out, and sometimes you just have to learn it. Okay. I know exactly my colors. And when I get a new color, that's the first thing I do is find out where it fits in the color wheel. And if it's transparent or opaque, and if it's granular or fluid. Here's an example of lunar black. It's what we call a granular pigment. And we'll touch on that. So there's all these different characteristics of watercolor because they're suspended only in water. And the water transports the pigment across the page. No other medium has this kind of character that watercolor has that makes it so difficult because of the transparency of it. With other colors, if the color isn't right, we can put another color on top and cover it up. We can put more color, white, we can fill it, we can cover it, whatever, with oil, with acrylics. And we say, I don't like that color, I'm going to change it and cover it. Watercolor, you cannot do that because it's a transparent medium. The more you do that, those colors will still show through. The more colors that you mix, the more muddy and black and more neutral you become. The key to making neutrals is to have neutrals with character. This is a neutral green, leans toward, this is a more neutral slate. This is the least interesting to me. A combination I would hardly ever use, if ever, in a painting. Cad red and cerulean blue. Ugh. I know it doesn't work. The only way to figure out if it works or not is these color wheels, right? Let's do the one more that I've already ruined for you here. And that's just adding that same Cad red to this. And this is already dried. So I'm going to do a glaze instead. And a glaze is just where you have a lot of water and a little pigment and just tint the color. So look how vibrant that orange is.
Which two have you?
I use cadmium and I use transparent yellow oxide or quinacridone gold. It's also called many different names, different manufacturers. The important thing is where it sits in a color wheel, right? And then, but look at that orange. Why is it vibrant orange? Because it doesn't contain, somebody at home answer this for me. Doesn't contain blue, right?
Yeah.
Look what happens if we take that same nice, vibrant orange and I add blue to it. Right? More of a brown, more of a burnt sienna. If I add lots more blue, lots more pigment, make it way darker, we could get to add more violet to this. More red, get that really dark. A little more blue. More yellow. We could get to burnt umber, right? Van Dyke brown. You get to any color you want to if you understand the relationship of this color wheel. Okay, how's that? So what I would like you to do for your homework, even if you haven't finished, even if you want to do it again, it's a good idea to lay your colors out on the side of the paper, figure out where they go in the color wheel.